So screening questions. And these are things that, we can ask clients. You don't have to do them all in one setting unless the client, especially if the client starts indicating that they're either living with or grew up in a family where there was someone with an addiction, then we may want to go through these more in depth. If that stuff doesn't really come up, then you may just listen for these or periodically ask one or two of these, throw them in there to see if codependency may be an issue as you're, getting to know the person. Do you keep quiet to avoid arguments? Sometimes codependents will bite their tongue. They don't want to make waves. I remember my grandmother, a sweet little woman, and I say little, she was 5 foot tall and maybe 100 pounds soaking wet. My grandfather was like 6'3", big guy, and he got to be kind of cranky when he would drink, and most of the time she would just putter around and she would get the kids to be quiet, and they would kind of walk on eggshells, but she would keep everything together. And I was in 3rd grade, so her kids were grown, my parents, and there was one day that he came home and he was drunk and he was just in an awful mood, and she looked at him, and I have to add, she is just the epitome of the Catholic woman. I mean, she says her rosary every day and never says a swear word, and a little bit of a thing. He comes home, he's in a mood. She looks at him, she's like, you know what? And she flips him the bird, and he just kind of stands there in shock for a second, as did the rest of us. And she went back to cooking, and about 30 seconds later she turned around and said, you know what, on second thought, take a whole handful, and walked into the bedroom. And we were all just like, oh, grandma just got some attitude. Not saying that that's the way to do it, but she had kept quiet for so long. And then she finally was like, you know what? I deserve better than this. I'm not going to live like this anymore. So she started standing up for herself and she was good about it. We want to ask clients, though, do you avoid talking about your feelings? If you get your feelings hurt by a friend, do you just not say anything? Because I don't want to make waves, and maybe if I say something, they'll get mad at me and they won't want to be my friend anymore. Or when something happens, do you address it, get it out in the open, and move on? If they keep quiet to avoid arguments, then assertiveness skills can be very helpful, and we can help them see how shoving that stuff down, constantly not stating their needs and their wants, can lead them to feel resentful and helpless and hopeless. So we can help them see why assertive communication would be good and provide them those skills if they think that's useful. Obviously, we want the client to start taking the role, and people who are codependent are not going to make waves. A lot of times they're not going to question what we say. If we said, stand on one leg and cluck like a chicken, I hope you would never do that, because that would be a ethical violation in so many different ways. But if we did, they may not argue, because they'd be like, well, I was told to do it and I don't want to make arguments. I don't want to make waves. And they also may modify how much they tell us in order to give the best picture, because they don't want to be rejected. So we've got to kind of bear that in mind and make sure that we are validating of how they feel and of their reactions if necessary. Are you always worried about others' opinions of you? Why? What does it matter if Sally, that lives 3 doors down from you, can't stand you? And talk about it. Try to ferret out why other people's opinions are so important. Could be that's the way they grew up. Their parents always taught them to be concerned about what everybody else thought of them. So we want to start looking at where are these cognitions, these beliefs coming from that are saying that we need to care deeply and desperately about everybody else's opinions. Have you ever lived with someone with an alcohol or drug problem? What was that like? Have you ever lived with someone who hits or belittles you? Obviously, these are screening questions that could lead to a domestic violence screening or something like that, but just asking them, because it's not uncommon for people who are domestically violent or people who have an alcohol or drug problem to be in relationships with people who are codependent. Are the opinions of others more important than your own? Sometimes people may say certain people's opinions are. I used to put my father's opinion really high. Whatever his opinion was usually pretty good. I did my own thing anyway, but his opinion mattered a lot to me and a lot more than other people's opinions. But ultimately, I was the one living my life, so my opinion really mattered. And it's important to have our clients really figure out whose opinion matters in terms of how I live my life. Do you have difficulty adjusting to changes at work or home? If you're trying to control everything and you're holding on, then when things start to change, it can throw you for a loop. Do you feel rejected when significant others spend time with friends? That fear of abandonment. So we want to start working on those issues. And why is it that you don't want to share with your friends or with your person with their friends? And a lot of times it comes down to, number one, they owe me because I've taken care of them through all of this. And number two, I'm afraid if they start spending time with those people that they're going to replace me. Do you doubt your ability to be who you want to be? Are you uncomfortable expressing your true feelings to others? And have you ever felt inadequate? I think most of us have felt inadequate at one time or another. So that's not necessarily, none of these are necessarily screen in or screen out questions. It's just giving us a better picture of what may be going on. Do you feel like a bad person when you make a mistake? So this leans more towards assessing self-esteem and global internal attributions. Do you have difficulty taking compliments or gifts? Self-esteem, feeling worthy. If they do, we want to look at why and help them address that. Do you feel humiliation when your child or spouse makes a mistake? They couldn't control, because that shows that they couldn't control absolutely everything in their life. Do you think people in your life would go downhill without your constant efforts? Do you frequently wish someone could help you get things done? So they take on this, they're trying to rescue everybody. Then they start getting resentful when people won't do what they want them to do, and they start feeling overwhelmed because they've got too much to do. So you can see how the martyr aspect can come out. Do you have difficulty talking to people in authority, such as the police or your boss? Are you confused about who you are or where you're going with your life? That leads back to that, weak ego strength, because they're taking on the opinions and ideas of everybody else, and they're so-and-so's spouse or so-and-so's parent. Do you have trouble saying no when asked for help? Trouble asking for help? This comes straight out of the dialectical behavior therapy manual on helping people ask for things and get yes and say no. So teaching healthy boundaries. Do you have so many things to do at once that you just can't do justice to any of them? And this is a question that I find is really powerful for a lot of clients, because it makes them step back and think and go, you know what? You're right. I want to be everything to everybody, and right now I'm no good to anybody because I'm just doing so much. And then we can say, okay, so let's make a list, let's prioritize, let's figure out what direction you want to go. So the Coda promises. I will know a new sense of, and Coda is Codependency Anonymous. And even if someone is not completely bought into the 12 steps, recovery from codependency does offer some liberation. So you can, look at how you may want to use these. But I will know a new sense of belonging. The feeling of emptiness and loneliness will disappear, because they'll have become friends with themselves. And hopefully they will become friends with support, so healthy social supports, and maybe a higher power. When I work with clients in 12-step programs, or places where we use 12-step programs, not everybody buys into the higher power. So one way we talk about it is God as good, orderly direction. So if you think of acceptance and commitment therapy, looking at those people, places, things, and experiences that are important to help you live a rich and meaningful life, that is your destination. Good, orderly direction makes sure that everything that you do is moving you toward that rich and meaningful life and not taking detours, or worse yet, making U-turns. I am no longer controlled by my fears. I overcome my fears and act with courage, integrity, and dignity. So learning how to deal with anxiety, learning how to deal with fear, learning how to identify what is worth being afraid of by addressing cognitive distortions, and then figuring out what your values are. You can't live with integrity unless you know what your values are. I know a new freedom. I release myself from guilt, worry, and regret about my past and present, and I'm aware enough not to repeat it. So everybody makes mistakes. Everybody has adversities. Everybody's had life. Okay, so there are some things that you don't want to do again, some things that you look back and you go, ooh, yeah. Regretting just locks up energy in the past. If you learn from it and are able to move on, then you're freeing up that energy to move towards the future. I know a new love and acceptance of myself and others, and I feel genuinely lovable, loving, and loved. Now, this is way down the road for a lot of our clients, but this is a goal. We want clients to feel like they're generally pretty awesome people. They're not perfect, because nobody's perfect, but they are pretty awesome. They're capable of loving others without overwhelming them, and they're capable of being loved in a healthy, effective boundary sort of way. I learned to see myself as equal to others. My new and renewed relationships are all with equal partners. So everybody's opinions matter, everybody's feelings matter. I'm capable of developing and maintaining healthy and loving relationships. I need to control and manipulate others. The need to control and manipulate others will disappear as I learn to trust those who are trustworthy. Not everybody's trustworthy. I wish they were. But because of their stuff, they may not be trustworthy. But the person who is codependent needs to learn how to identify dangerous people. And that's generally those people that they feel a compelling need to rescue. But that's not always the case. So we want them to start figuring out, what does a healthy, loving relationship look like? What do boundaries look like? What does give and take look like? I learned that it's possible to mend and to become more loving, intimate, and supportive. I have the choice of communicating with my family in a way which is safe for me and respectful for them. So that assertive communication comes out now, instead of blaming, minimizing, being angry at, lashing out. Being able to state what I need, what my feelings are. If they like it, great. But if they don't like it, being able to say, all right, that I respect your opinion. I acknowledge that I'm a unique and precious creation. I no longer need to rely solely on others to provide my sense of worth. And this is a huge thing. And there are some awesome self-esteem exercises you can do in group as well as individual. I trust the guidance I receive from my higher power. And again, if they don't believe in a higher power, we look at guidance I receive from my good, orderly direction. And we look at, what is your Google Maps telling you? Used to say the triptych. For those of you who are, old, when we used to go on trips, we would get a triptych from AAA, and it would be the maps and everything that would get us from one place to the other. Some of you may be going, oh, I've forgotten about those. Yeah. Now we use Google Maps. So on your directions in Google Maps, that's your good, orderly direction. It's telling you where to go, and they even tell you when there's a traffic jam how to get around it, and still keep on your best route to your destination. I gradually experience serenity, strength, and spiritual growth in my daily life. You can spend an entire session just talking about what these things are. What is serenity? What would it look like if you felt serene? Are there other words? What other words are synonyms for serene? Because serene's not a word we use a lot. We say it in the serenity prayer, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. But if you don't know what serenity is, then you're kind of out. So we talk about what serenity means in general and what it looks like for each person. We talk about experiencing strength in their daily life, focusing on the strengths, focusing on their successes, and spiritual growth. Spirituality looks different for every person, but we talk about it in terms of connectedness. What you do impacts everybody else, and what everybody else does, unfortunately, probably impacts you. If you walk past someone who looks desperately depressed on the street, that may tug at your heartstrings. It may not impact you for the rest of the day, but it's going to have a little impact on you. I know it does on me. So we talk about what spiritual growth means. What does it mean to create an environment that nurtures love? So codependents generally get in relationships with addicts or others who need to be rescued. That's kind of a clue right there. If they're talking about every relationship they've had and the hiccups that have been in it, and you hear that they're in this rescue dynamic, being alert to what's the function of that relationship. Is it really about love among equal partners, or is it about desperately needing somebody to prove your worth? Codependents do not feel worthy or lovable. They need someone else to validate them. Recovery involves developing a sense of self-worth, addressing depression and anxiety, and learning about and creating a network of healthy relationships.